Hello everyone and a very warm welcome back to the channel stumbled over that a bit, for my continuation of the Coral Sea scenario from the Fires of Midway. Now when I left you at the end of the previous video, the carrier Zuikaku's airstrike had just limped back home to their parent carrier, having lost some planes, and had what I could probably describe as a slightly disappointing strike on the US fleet. They did damage the Lexington a bit more, but they'd hoped to achieve a little better than what they actually did. However, the Japanese still have reason to be confident because Shokaku is next in the turn order, and because she has the turn 4 card, she steers into the wind. She's going to be launching 4 aircraft cards at the US fleet. So looking at her options, and she does have a big complement of bombers, they are going to include the obligatory 0 because they'd be crazy not to. But I'm going to stick with Japanese doctrine at the time because obviously we can get another 3 cards in there. And as of May 1942, the Japanese mindset was still very much that the torpedo bomber was the primary ship-killing weapon. And to be fair, unlike the US Navy at the time, they had very good reasons for thinking this. So they will send along one group of VALs. Oh, whoops, turbulence again. AKA my shoulder. One group of VALs for form's sake. But they will send their entire complement of Kate torpedo bombers. So this is a very significant strike package they have put together. So they're not holding very much back at all. And they're going to send this zooming over towards the US carriers. If I glance us back at the strategic map, they have a distance of 1, 2, 3 to cover. So let's draw some of those fuel cards and see what we end up with. More turbulence while I try and straighten this thing out. There we go, kind of, possibly, maybe. So, fuel cards. Sorry, more turbulence. Ah, stop wobbling. You're making me airsick. So, fuel card 1. Ooh, they're losing time. Fuel card 2, they have a headwind. And fuel card 3, they are thankfully closing fast. So the Japanese aircraft make it to the target zone with no mishap. And here's hoping, for the US task force's sake, that they pick up the incoming strike. They have a good chance of it. They've got 2 dice, and that's a big strike, so a 4 or less will detect it. And it does. So the US radar spots the incoming Japanese attack. I think, it's hard to know who to scramble. I think because the Yorktown has already had her turn for this round, it makes sense to scramble her fighters into their combat air patrol slot. So we're going to do that. But of course, the Japanese do have fighters accompanying their force, so the US aircraft barely get into the sky when they're pounced on by Zeros, so they've got no choice but to engage them. And the melee now becomes a bit general. So the Japanese do want to continue chipping away at the US fighter defenses, so they're going to commit a card. The US is getting a bit sick and tired of this mistreatment, so they're going to play 1 too. And it is not a bluff this time. So the Wildcats are going to throw in a rolling dive. And the Zeros are being a bit more cautious. Well, actually, not so much that they're being more cautious. Admiral Takagi is officially out of cards. As this turn progresses, I'm not going to bother playing the bluff card because it's the only combat card in the Japanese player's hand. And because Takagi kept on repairing the Shoho, his strike group is basically out of special options. So after the cut dive, the Japanese have no more choices. So it's 4 Japanese dice against 4 US. Let's see who gets the upper hand in this little exchange. Ooh, and it is the Japanese very narrowly. So they got 3 bullet icons on that 0, and they're going to make their roll. And their highest number is a 5, so that That poor wildcat is damaged, but at least he lives to fight another day. So I'll clear these combat cards out of the way. And of course, the Zeros have done their work by distracting the by distracting the combat air patrol. So they don't really need to worry about that anymore. I'll put these guys next to the Yorktown. So none of the Japanese bombers are in bad shape. So the Japanese player gets to choose. Attacking the Lexington is a very logical choice because she's already in a bad way. More importantly, she is going to be launching strikes potentially next. So the Japanese really need to wreck her now so that the Americans are forced to try to repair her in order to save the ship. So the dive bombers are going to have the dubious honor of going first. The Japanese, of course, have no cards that they can play. The US player still does not have any ship support cards, so I am not going to sort of bother placing the bluff card. So it's going to be a straight roll off, 2 dice versus 2 dice. Ah, bad luck for the Lexington. It's tied, but bombers always win ties. So drawing the target matrix card, the Japanese have a choice of 2, and ouch, they are definitely going for that one. So they roll their 4 dice. Ooh, that was a bit painful. So they got 2 regular hits and a critical hit. So unfortunately for poor Lexington, I'm going to need more of those fire counters. Now the 2 regular hits are consolidated into an inferno, and the critical hit becomes another inferno. Now with the basic game damage rules, because the Lexington's bulkhead is already on ruptured, it does not move any further this phase. If we were playing with the rather brutal historical damage rules, which are an optional rule, then Lexington would already be flipped to her crippled side. Now that's not to say she isn't already in trouble as far as the game goes, but she'd be in even more trouble right now. So the Vals break off, having done their job, and the first of the Kates come in, because the poor carrier's suffering isn't over yet. So we'll keep with the straight roll-offs. Nobody's got any lucky cards or fog of war or anything like that. It's just straight bomber versus carrier. Ah, the Lexington's luck has turned around again. So as the bombers maneuver for an attack, the ship shows she's still got a bit of life left in her, and she's going to feed them some anti-aircraft fire. And she rolls a 6, which is perfect. So perhaps those Kates came on a little too confidently, because they meet a wall of flak and the squadron is pretty much eliminated. Unfortunately for the Lexington, there are, of course, more where that came from. So the Japanese are going to make a second try with their torpedo bombers. And this second group is somewhat more fortunate, regrettably. So looking at those target matrices, for the purposes of a torpedo attack, there's not actually much difference there. So they're just going to go for it. 3 dice, needing a 1 or 2 to hit. And here we go. Oh, bad luck, Lexington. She's just got herself another flood counter. I foresee a load of utter misery when Lexington's turn comes round. And so those bombers break off as well. And their work is done. Unfortunately for the Lexington, the Shokaku threw in an incredibly effective attack over there. So they return to their carrier and land. That's all good. And now we get Admiral's actions. Now, of course, because Takagi is still confident, the Shoho can't do anything about her damaged bulkhead by receiving a save the ship order. But he can use his Admiral's action for 3 repair points there in order to get her to put out those fires. And the reason he's giving that order is because the end of the round is coming. And with the end of the round come the damage checks that ships have to perform if they're flooding or burning. And having to do those is a really unpleasant experience in this game. Now Fletcher over here, he really has to do something to help the poor old Lexington. She's in a bad way with the flooding and the fires. He only has 3... He can only give her 3 repair points for his Admiral's action, so I think the most critical one is to start tackling those blazes, because 3 repair points lets you get rid of one of them completely. So Lexington's going to start fighting her fires and just hope that the flooding doesn't get too far out of control. Oh, do you know something? I just skipped the cap step. The Japanese have no cap in the air, but of course Yorktown's damaged Wildcats would have landed and been refueled and rearmed. So sorry, that's me caught up now. And so we now get to the poor Lexington. Now, if it weren't for the fires, the poor old Lex might have considered throwing a heavy strike at the Japanese, because although their big carriers were largely untouched, it would have been the end of the round, and a successful US strike that had basically done that to one of them could have been decisive. But at the moment, the best Lexington could do, given that she's still on fire, would be to send up 2 aircraft cards. And even though the Japanese don't have any cap in the air, that's a horrifically vulnerable strike at a range which is really not that suitable in terms of playing to US strength. So, given the state she's in, I think if I were Frank Jack Fletcher, I would concentrate on saving the ship. So that is exactly what I'm going to do. So poor Lexington, she doesn't get her turn to be aggressive this turn, because we are going to give her a save the ship order. So that's 5 repair points. I don't want her to become crippled, so I'm going to spend all 5 repair points, and I'm going to trust to luck that the US do well on their rolls and that the ship's structure holds out, because if it doesn't, she'll wind up crippled anyway. But I don't really see what else I could have done there, because if I had spent the 5 repair points clearing that damage, she would have ended up flipping to her crippled side anyway. So this is me living on hope. And of course, the other 2 things you can do with a save the ship order is draw 2 more combat cards. Those could be useful in a future turn. And so at the end of that, we get another Admiral's phase. Now, Takagi has nothing to repair, but his ships do lack a combat air patrol, but he also has a completely empty hand of cards. So what he's going to do is draw cards to bring himself back up to 7, including the bluff card. Now, the reason he's done this is he knows there is a full round of combat coming up in the next turn, possibly with the US side lacking USS Lexington, but he doesn't want to bank on that. He wants to play this uncharacteristically safe. It's a big enough chance not putting any combat air patrol zeros up, but he really needs those cards if he wants to make an impression. Over on the US side, of course, Fletcher is most concerned with saving the Lexington. So once more, he is going to remove as many damage dice as he can. And he's also going to try and remove the damage element that's impairing his ship's operations the most, and that's the fires. So 3 repair points lets the Lexington take away the last of the fires. So she's still suffering severe flooding, but at least the fires have gone out. And so that's it. We have completed a round for every single carrier in the game. So that's one full round, concluding each time with an Admiral's special action. But now we come to the very end phase, and this is where it gets painful for the poor Lexington. So you get what they call the carrier carnage phase. So full strength carriers with their counters on step 3, their bulkhead counters on step 3 ruptured, would flip to their crippled side at this point. Now, because they chose save the ship and managed to shore the bulkhead up, that does not happen to her yet. But now we get what's called the explosion test, where you have to roll 1 dice for each icon there. So poor old Lexington's got to roll 5 dice. And that little 5 over there in the middle top is her damage threshold. Every time she rolls a 5 or 6, it moves that bulkhead counter back towards ruptured. So let's hope she doesn't roll high. Oh my gosh, the Lexington got through that in incredible style. That was amazing. So she's flooding badly, but she is still in the fight. And that was extremely good timing, because that could well have resulted in her entering the next round of play with very, very severe damage indeed. So now we look at air wing losses for the purposes of victory points, because both sides have lost a few aircraft. In the case of the Japanese, every 5 aircraft cards in the watery grave give the US 1 point. However, there are only 3, so the casualty threshold has not been high. Same story for the Japanese. So far, only a single group of Wildcats are in the American watery grave, so no victory points for the Japanese there. And now we come to the victory or retreat phase. I'm actually going to be a bit controversial here, because although neither side has suffered terribly badly, as the US player, I am tempted to retreat from this one. And if that sounds exceptionally cowardly, I will explain my reasoning. If I was simply playing a scenario for the victory points, I would go all in and fight to the death with my Bull Halsey hat on in the hope of sinking some of the Japanese carriers. However, if I were, let's say, for example, playing the campaign version of this game, I would be very conscious of the fact that Lexington's in quite a bit of trouble, with a fair bit of damage to her. And although the air wings of the US carriers are still largely intact, I'd be very mindful of the fact that those Japanese strikes are going to keep coming in, and the Lexington is in a very vulnerable position. If I withdraw now, there is a chance of keeping her safe for a future action where we might do better. Whenever I do play games of this nature, whether I'm playing a campaign scenario or whether I'm playing a individual mission, as it were, I always try to put myself in the Admiral's shoes. And, you know, as we do when we play these games, imagine it's real life and consider very carefully what I would do and whether it's worth the risk in persevering. And just to illustrate what I'm talking about, I'll be back in a second. Sorry about that. This is what I was looking for. So these are the campaign charts that allow players to keep track of their campaign successes and their remaining carriers. Now, if I sacrificed Lexington in this battle, you'd have a slightly weaker US force available at Midway. I mean, I know historically Lexington wasn't available at Midway anyway, for obvious reasons. But were I planning to face a much stronger Japanese fleet, I would want her along. And the other thing I'm conscious of is that so far, I have not inflicted any meaningful damage on the Japanese carriers. I did mess Shoho up quite a bit, but the Japanese have done a wonderful job of knocking her back into shape. So she's only got her bulkhead to worry about, and she doesn't have any explosion tests. So I think, all things considered, although I am letting the Japanese get away with it on this occasion, given how much water is getting into Lexington's people and aeroplane compartments, it's probably a good time to call it a day and have the US withdraw. So there we go, a somewhat less bloody version of the Coral Sea, but one that at least saw my two US carriers come home rather than one coming back and the other coming back so seriously damaged that she needs some rather desperate repairs before Midway. Although equally, I expect I've probably caused the US Navy problems at the Battle of Midway, because it may well be that Nagumo's task force turns up with 6 carriers instead of 4. So we'll see what that could have had. I might play that through on a separate game in the future. But that effectively took us through one entire round of the Fires of Midway. So what we effectively did in these videos was we travelled all the way down from the search grid, through the repeated stages of the carrier phases, and then down to the end phase. So that would have been one complete round with top and tail. And if both players wished to continue the fight, then they could do so. So there we go. I hope you all enjoyed that. I really did enjoy this game. It was a bit bloodless, as I say, but I find this quite an absorbing game. And although bits of it are perhaps only dubiously realistic and some design corners have been cut for the sake of playability, I find it builds up a marvellous bit of tension, and I really enjoy it as a carrier warfare game. It suits the theme very well. But again, I just want to thank you all for following this series. I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed making it. To all my long-suffering veterans, as always, hello guys. I hope you're all doing really, really well. Thank you for following these videos. It's always great to see you. Thank you for the many, many comments I've been getting on this series. It's really fun to interact with you guys, and it's really great to get your points of view and conversation topics on these things. So as always, thank you very much for those. To anyone who's new, if this is my first video that you're watching, a very warm welcome to my channel. If it's the Fires of Midway that brought you here, I hope you've either enjoyed watching the series, or if you haven't seen the whole lot, please feel free to go back and watch this battle from start to finish, if you would like to. If it's wargaming in general that's led you here, please do have a look at some of the other videos I've done. You're more than welcome. Have a meander. And whoever you guys are and wherever you're watching from, thank you very much again, and I will look forward to seeing you in the next video, whatever that one may be. I suspect there'll probably be some final thoughts where I do a wrap-up on what we've been talking about here. But until then, thank you very much. Take care and goodbye.